Alright, artifact video. We got some daylight. Let's see if that helps a little bit. With the shadows and stuff and, you know, overall lighting. I got a bunch of boxes of Pedernales and probably related type points. I got three of these full, and I picked some of them out just to examine some extremes. And I picked these out because of the extreme barbs and maybe extreme thinning and extreme edge work. It depends on the piece. Okay, so these are what they call Pedernales points. This is pretty classic. It has a long stem. It's notched in the base. It's got bold flaking a lot of times, not always, but you know. And these were made for a long period of time. Thousands of years they made this style in the same area. So these have impact fractures, so they were thrown, but they can also be used as knives. All right, so it's a multi-tool. This hafting area is quite large, so it can be securely hafted to a knife handle or an atlatl dart or even a spear. Now these are kind of delicate for handheld spears. A handheld spear needs a hefty tip, so most of the time the tips on spears were just sharpened wood. All right, it's very effective for piercing with sharpened wood. You can even triangulate or make the point triangular in shape on wood, and it penetrates better because it has slight edges to it. For handheld spears, in my opinion, handheld spears were not stone tipped. Knives and projectiles were stone tipped, in my opinion. And I say my opinion not because it has weight, but because I'm trying to be humble about this. It's something to be examined and not taken all that seriously. Okay? We don't know exactly what these were used for. Some of them have use wear and some have impact damage, so we can kind of tell. Anyway, another opinion that I have, which should be taken with a grain of salt, is that many of these were heat treated to make them easier to knap and not made from raw stuff. Okay? So, here we go. I think the natural light does help with the shadows. Let's zoom in 2 times. The edges on this are just crudely knapped. Extreme skill in thinning, but edge preparation, they're either, you know, used a lot for cutting and they don't resharpen them often, or they didn't care too much about the edges because maybe this was only a thrown type. Of course, edges do matter when you're throwing it, but what matters the most is the kinetic energy, the power behind the throw, and the shot placement on the animal. It has some deposit after the fact on it. The notches, this one has a clean pop out and this one is kind of stalled. And you'll see some of them are not symmetrical. Well, many of them, I would probably say, you know, maybe more than half, or so the majority are not going to be symmetrical either in this area where the ears are different lengths. Barbs are different lengths. Barbs are put at different heights. I would say half of them are like that and half of them are very symmetrical. Like this one here, the notch is not, these notches are not symmetrical. This one's stalled, so they didn't continue, and this one has a nice clean pop out. So if you are making them perfectly symmetrical with clean pop outs on both sides, you're not making them like they used to be made. This is an actual artifact. Okay. Now I'm showing the good ones up front because most people don't watch past 5 minutes. So you get to see some of the good stuff up front. Again, the edge is only slightly sharper than the sides of the stem. This is actually sharp down here on the stem. About as sharp as the blade. Although this blade is pretty good, I can still feel some good sharpness to it. But yeah, see the little step fracture right there? We didn't care. This side's pretty good. I don't know if this is part of the damage. Some of these are just clean snaps from being stepped on or carelessly used, or this might even be a ding somehow. Just it got dinged, something hit it from the side. Pretty common to have something accidentally hit your point. Now I kept this aside because of the extreme barb. It looks like this was broken in manufacture. Right, so the last flake, one of the last flakes could have blown away one of the barbs. But anyway, this looks like it's not finished because this side is pretty crude. Is this ground down for the next hit? Because maybe they were going to take a flake that way. Another flake that way. No, it's not ground down. Okay, now this has a short stem. So it's a different variety of Pedernales than the long stem variety. Now a Marshall does not have a notch in the bottom. A Marshall looks just like this, but with no notch. It's either slightly concave or straight for a Marshall. But a Pedernales will have a notch. And a lot of times they have that thinning flake up in the stem area, but it's all aggressively flaked on these pieces. This is classic right here, these big bold thinning flakes toward the end of the manufacture of the piece. They do the stems pretty much, the stems first, then thinning, and then finish out the barbs. If I'm taking these pieces to be, you know, typical of the manufacturing process. This one is heat damaged after the fact, but you can see how the original was pretty wide. They do the stem first and they leave the barb pretty big and wonky and then refine it later. But yeah, the stem is fully formed. Now this could have been broken in manufacture and tossed in a fire, or it could have been just partially made and then accidentally left out during a brush fire or something. You know, it's possible to leave your work on a stone out in the field. You know, you're working in your napping area is not in the campsite, but out somewhere in the field, and you leave these on a stone out there to get back to a little bit later, but then a brush fire goes through the area and ruins all your pieces. Yeah, that could be one of the explanations. Could also be they tried to heat treat it and messed it up because this doesn't respond well to heat, this particular stone or whatever. Okay, you can notice the variation in the stem size. Skinnier stem, and it's almost gower like. So many different cultures were making this particular style. Another style is this bow-legged style. I call it bow-legged. It was small barbs, but very well made. Same edge treatment all the way around, all the way, even under here in the notch. It's all the same. They don't need to make this area nice and neat. Sometimes this area is nice and neat and this isn't. I don't know why. But yeah, it's the same all the way. You would think that they would make the sides a little bit different, but they didn't. You know, make it more conducive to a wrap so it doesn't cut the wrapping. What this tells me is if it's sharp on the sides, it's wrapped with sinew, because sinew doesn't require you to tightly wrap it in the beginning. You just wrap it normally with normal snugness. Make it snug but not tight, and it'll shrink into place without cutting itself. It'll shrink and tighten up, but it won't cut itself as it's shrinking and tightening up. Whereas if you use a non-shrinking wrap like a plant cordage that doesn't shrink very much after it dries, you need to wrap it really tightly to get a firm haft. Okay, so that's my interpretation there. So we got different base styles. You can see there's 3 completely different base styles, but they're classified as the same type, Pedernales. Now, that doesn't mean that they are the same type. Okay, that's just the archaeological classification. These may be completely different types because they were made by completely different cultures using completely different tool sets and completely different strategies. We don't know. They're just classified all together. I think just because of laziness. Yeah. All right. Now, some of these, I don't know if they're resharpened or made small on purpose sometimes. This one looks like it is resharpened. And well resharpened. And with bold flakes. See that? They don't just resharpen with small flakes. They still use bold flakes throughout the process. Although there are some small flakes in there, you can tell that the resharpening is pretty serious. They thin it down as they resharpen it. They don't keep the same thickness, as opposed to a beveled point, which keeps the same thickness in the middle. These, as they're being resharpened, are also thinned slightly more. If they can. If they can thin it, they'll continue to thin it down as they resharpen. And this is skillfully made because it's thickest right where it normally snaps. Right there. And that's pretty typical of a lot of these. Right? It's always thickest right where it's going to snap. If you look, the vast majority will be thick right where it usually snaps. Which tells me that they're using these for heavy duty stuff, either throwing them or knives that are, you know, meant to cut heavy duty stuff. And you can see how delicate the barbs are. That's one mystery that I can't figure out. Why would they leave them so delicate? But they did. And it's not symmetrical. This is not dinged. It's just that way. They resharpen it. They don't symmetritize it. You know, they just go with the flow. Whatever's left, they keep it. If you resharpen it and you still got a little bit left, all right, just leave it on there. You don't try to match the other side. At least not on that one. And again, barbs are different lengths, although I think this one is a ding. That one is broken. Pretty sure. But the depth of the notch is different. The length of the ears is different. And the blade is wonky. See, the center line of the blade is... Let me see. Do I have something like a pointer? If you go by the stem sides, the center line is like right there. And you can see how the blade is lopsided. There's more taken off of this side than that side. So if the point is also presumably instead of being in line with the sides of the stem, it's off center like that, you got to move it in the haft to get the tip to line up. So I don't think they would unwind it, move it, and then, you know, rewind it with wrapping to get it centered again for a projectile point. So this indicates to me that it was used as a knife if it's asymmetrical, because it's very important to have the tip lined up perfectly with the foreshaft or the shaft of the projectile. And if it's off center, that means it's a knife, because that's not important with a knife. Okay. A very long ear. You can pretty much assume that they've got those long ears on both sides, like this one. Okay, and some of them are rounded, some are pointy ears, like this one too. And it's a mystery to me why they would make them so long, because they break off so easy. Yeah. Now this one has a point that's almost intact, but it looks like it's been resharpened. It could also have been made this way without resharpening. So that's another variation on the stem types. So you got, let's see. So you've got various stem types so far. You got that one, this one. These ears are longer than that. And then you got these rounded short ones, ears. This one barely has any ears on it. And there's other variations as well. There's smaller. Let's see if I can find a small one. You'll see in the other batch, there are some pattern. Here's one. There's some Pedernales that have very small bases and stems. See the difference in size? Some of them have stems that are quite small. There have been studies that are fairly recent that attempt to classify these into different groups, these Pedernales points, because they got such a variation that even the archaeologists realize that it doesn't make sense to keep them all classified in the same group. So they're attempting, I think, to make divisions in the styles and reclassify. I don't know. What's the latest news on the reclassification? As far as I know, they're still calling them all Pedernales, but they might be like type 1, type 2, type 3, or whatever. Okay. All right. Yeah, we can study what's not broken. Like this might be an impact fracture. It looks like it is of some sort. But yeah, this one's got a nice, everything's got nice pop outs except for that one side there on the bottom of the notch. And these basal notches also vary from very well made and nice and neat to cruddy and crunchy and not very nice at the bottom of the notch. Some of them are heavily stalled. But yeah, the purpose of the notch is for glue. Yeah, lots of glue can fit in there, and it'll, you know, that's what I'm thinking. It also mimics the root or the roots of teeth, so maybe they thought, well, if it works for teeth, why not for a projectile point? You know, the tooth of your point of your knife or whatever should have the roots of a tooth. I don't know. This one might be broken in manufacture. It's got wonky edges. Yeah. When the edge is worse than the sides of the stem, to me that's unfinished. Although this stem here, it's kind of wonky too, so you never know. Could be finished. But yeah, I set this aside because of the barbs. Because of the barb. But you can see that they were different lengths, even at this stage. Nice and thick, right where it breaks, they have it nice and thick. That's pretty classic for this type. Same with this one. The last one we just looked at, right? Yeah. And they look the same overall, but one of them has a not so concave base and one has a deep notch. Very aggressive thinning flakes from the base. Step fractures up on the blade, which they didn't care about. This one's got some either heavy resharpening flakes or it was made just like this and not reworked. Nice big old pop outs. See how large these pop outs are? They look punched and not made with pressure. This one does look resharpened and they had a hard time with it. But yeah, this is one of the long-eared type. Deep notching. And you know, it's flatter on one side than the other. Although this one's pretty good. It can probably be inserted into a V-shaped notch, but I'm pretty sure the vast majority of all projectile points were inserted into a flat bottom notch. So it gives you room to move the stem around in the bottom of the notch and align the blade with the foreshaft or the shaft. Small barbs. And you know, from resharpening probably. Small tool used for the pop outs and for the notches. Small tip tool. Okay. So it's either, well, if I was going to do that kind of notch, I would use a screwdriver shaped flat notching tool, or a reverse indirect punch with a very tiny tip. Yeah. Or even a regular vertical punch with a tiny tip, just punch it down. But for a tough stone, this appears to be tough stone. That's a pretty narrow notching attempt right there, or a success at notching with a very small diameter tip tool. The base notch is kind of stalled. Yeah, it still has that unreleased flake in there. So that one looks like it's done with pressure, in my opinion. I don't know. Probably broken in manufacture, just because the blade does not look done. thickest where it usually snaps. This one is kind of wonky. There are other similar types to Pedernales. One is called Jetta, right? This might be a Jetta type because it's all wonky. Jetta points are wonky, and I've made Jetta points as reproductions, and people look at me funny, and they don't think that's an actual artifact type. They think everything's perfect and beautiful and nicely formed and very deliberate, like this one. They think everything is like this one. Yeah, there's a little bit of step fracturing. Yeah, there's a little bit of wonky, but it's symmetrical, well balanced, straight. They think everything's like that, but no. There's a scoop out here. There's some step fractures in there. Side A is much better than side B. This is an impact fracture, it looks like. So it's thrown at something. The edges are not that sharp. This edge is okay. This edge is a little bit better. It's only slightly better. Well, this one actually feels ground down a little bit. But the edges are only slightly better than the stem. All right. Two aggressive thinning flakes from the base. Now, were they done? They're done before the fact. You can see they did this flake first, and then this flake overlaps it. See that? This flake was done first, and then this flake overlaps it. See how it overlaps it right there? But this on this side, it looks like the opposite. This was, the sides were done, and then this flake was done. But I don't know. These might be intrusive. This one here, this flake might be intrusive into the thinning flake. Same with this. Same with this. So maybe the thinning flake was made first. It just coincidentally, nothing interrupted this little ripply effect at the end of it. You know, the thinning flake termination. Nothing wiped that out like it did on this side. So it could be, yeah. Looks like that this was punched out after the thinning flake here. See this little punch out for the notch? Intrudes into the thinning flake. So I guess they all slightly intrude. Yeah. Did I say it didn't? This does look like it slightly intrudes into the thinning flake. Okay. So thinning flake first. Nice pointy barb. But the depth is different from one side to the next. You look at the sides of the stem to know the orientation of the hafting, and then you can see that these barbs are different. You know, they're not symmetrical. Lots of stepping on the edge. See that? Lots of step fracturing there. They didn't care because it's got a good edge to it. It's got a fairly good edge. It's not sharp, but it was probably very sharp back in the day. Yeah, I chalked that up to damage just by being in the ground or being used, because it's very, very thin, and it's not easy to do this without having it being sharp. If you try to thin this much, you are going to have sharpness on your finished piece just by the nature of trying to get it that thin. Yeah, see, this is an early stage, not complete, probably broken in manufacture because of the sides. These are nowhere near how they should look on a finished piece. the edges. This is not a complete edge. And if I get one of the finer edged points, you can see it's not finished because it's extremely crude compared to one of these that are finished. Probably broken in manufacture. And I think, you know, this is one of the last flakes. Does it intrude into the thinning flake from the stem? I can't tell on this one. This one does. See, this thinning flake first, and then this intrudes into it. This pop out intrudes into this thinning flake from the base. I don't know if this was done. It looks like this was done after the pop out, but I don't know. I don't know for sure. But even with those big, bold thinning flakes, it's still pretty hefty right where it usually snaps. And the next flake would have probably been in this area to get rid of this mass here. But it's not dulled ahead of time. You know, they could dull it and fix it just before flaking, I suppose. Is this ground right there? This is still sharp. Right here. This is still sharp. This is where I would take a flake, but not with this sharpness. I would grind it down first. And while I'm grinding this down, I would grind that down, and I would grind this down. I grind all along the edge just so I can take off flakes opportunistically, but that's just my style. They might not have used my style, obviously. So you're getting it from my perspective. You're getting these assessments from my perspective. All right, I'll go through the rest of these pretty quickly. Big old barb. Again, small tool tip for the notching. This barb almost extends down. Well, it probably does extend all the way down to the original corner of the bottom of this preform. Nice edge work, but most of these aren't very sharp. There are types that are very sharp. Well, this one here, well, but I'll show you as time goes on. I'll show artifacts that consistently have edges that are very sharp, and there are some artifacts that consistently have edges that are not sharp. These are in between. Some of them, it's a mixed bag. Some of the Pedernales have sharp edges and some don't. Some of them have long barbs, some of them don't. Some of them have, you know, small tool, evidence of small tool to make the notching, and some have evidence of large tool for notching. Made in different ways. Probably impact on this one. And yes, it does cause ears to break off. During impact, you get a tip and an ear break off. That's pretty common. kind of sharp. Kind of. Yeah. It is sharp right here. Okay. That was a nice thin one. Similar to this. These two are very similar to each other. An overall feel, you know. But, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. These could be 1,000 years apart. They just coincidentally feel very similar and look similar. They could be made, you know, within a year of each other, or a day of each other, or 1,000 years of each other. We don't know. Is that a tool? Can that be used? Has it been reworked? It's an interesting question. It does look like it's a tool of some sort. It does look reworked to be, you know, spoke shave or something. Alright, that's what they call them. Some kind of shave or whatever they might need that for. It just repurposed it in that way. I don't know. But that looks intentional. Because it looks a little bit reworked. Or at least has some use wear on it. I don't know. See, I say I don't know because there could be a lot of other explanations, and you know, at least one more explanation. I've been trying to make Pedernales with barbs like this, and I'm having a hard time. So there's got to be a trick to it that I'm not understanding. I guess I got to start out with a stem that's pretty wide, and I don't start out with a wide base on a lot of these. And I'm expecting a big old barb, and I never get it because I guess I'm not starting wide enough. But this edge quality is very good. Overall, this is the type of Pedernales that I would like to learn how to make. This type, you know, this type. There's another reason why I set these aside, because I want to learn how to make these types. This type. See, even though the barbs are long, the bases are slightly different. This was not as deeply notched as this one. I mean, that could be the same culture, just different nappers. The bases are the same width. Yeah, they're just shaped slightly differently. It could be the same culture. Yeah. Yeah, some uncanny similarities. Yeah. Yeah, very similar. Uncanny. See, this one's not deeply notched. Some of these are not deeply notched. And you can kind of stick them in the same category. Kind of, sort of. You know what I mean? But you never know. They might have been made by entirely different cultures. Okay, only a couple more in this. Yeah, only a few more. Now there's a barb and a notch for you right there. See, what I'm planning on doing is drawing this out and then turning it over and drawing it out on the other side so I can get something symmetrical, and then look at how these tips are made, and then add the top part and come up with a design for this, make a pattern, and then learn to duplicate from that pattern. That's my ultimate goal on some of these. All right, so that's it for that box. On to the next.